They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but watching my wife and her boss get arrested at the airport with my stolen inheritance was worth every moment I spent planning their downfall. This is how a quiet Iowa teacher outsmarted two cheaters who thought they were untouchable. And trust me, you've never seen karma work this perfectly. My name is David Carter, and I'm 47 years old. For the past 15 years, I've been working as a high school history teacher in Cedar Falls, Iowa, one of those small Midwest towns where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay buried for long. I've always been the quiet type, the guy who prefers grading papers on Friday nights over hitting the local bars. My colleagues often joke that I'm married to my job, but the truth is, I was married to someone I thought was the love of my life. Her name was Jessica, and we'd been together for 12 years. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a local insurance company. Ambitious, sharp, always talking about networking events and professional development opportunities. I admired her drive, even when it meant she'd be out 3 or 4 nights a week, leaving me to heat up leftover casserole and watch Netflix alone in our modest 2-story home on Elm Street. Everything changed 6 months ago when my father passed away unexpectedly. Dad was a frugal man who'd worked construction his entire life, saving every penny he could. When the lawyer read his will, I discovered he'd left me $230,000, money I never knew existed. It was enough to pay off our mortgage, maybe even take that trip to Europe Jessica had been dreaming about for years. I remember the exact moment I told her about the inheritance. We were sitting in our kitchen, the one with the chipped linoleum floors and the refrigerator that hummed too loudly. Jessica's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding day. She wrapped her arms around me, whispering about how this was our chance, and how proud she was to be my wife. But something felt different after that day. Jessica became more secretive about her phone, more evasive about her whereabouts. She started talking about a spiritual retreat she wanted to attend, some wellness center in Colorado that cost $8,000 for 2 weeks. When I hesitated about the expense, she got upset, saying I was being controlling and that she needed space to find herself. I should have trusted my instincts then. I should have asked more questions. But I was a fool in love, and I wanted to believe that the woman I'd pledged my life to would never betray the trust we'd built together. I had no idea what was coming. The first red flag appeared 2 weeks after I transferred the inheritance money into our joint savings account. Jessica had always been careful with money. She'd clip coupons and compare prices at 3 different grocery stores. But suddenly she was coming home with designer bags from boutiques I'd never heard of, wearing jewelry that looked expensive enough to cost more than my monthly salary. When I asked about a particularly stunning diamond bracelet she was wearing during dinner at Applebee's, she brushed it off. "Oh, this old thing? I've had it forever, David. You just never notice what I wear." The way she said it stung, like I was some inattentive husband who couldn't be bothered to appreciate his wife. But I knew that bracelet was new. I'd been married to this woman for over a decade, and I'd never seen it before. The second red flag came when I checked our joint account online. Jessica had always handled most of our finances, and I'd trusted her completely. But curiosity got the better of me one evening while she was at another one of her networking events. What I saw made my stomach drop. In just 3 weeks, there had been 5 cash withdrawals totaling $18,000. When I asked her about it the next morning over coffee, she had an explanation ready. "I told you about the retreat, David. I had to put down deposits for the program, the accommodations, and the meal plans. These spiritual centers don't take credit cards. They want everything in cash to maintain the authentic experience." She said it with such conviction that I almost believed her. Almost. But then came the phone calls. Jessica had always been chatty on the phone with her girlfriends, but these conversations were different. She'd take her phone to the basement or step outside onto our back porch speaking in hushed tones. Once I caught a fragment of conversation through the kitchen window. "He doesn't suspect anything." "Yes. By next week. I can't wait to finally be free." The word free hit me like a punch to the gut. Free from what? From our marriage? From me? That night, as Jessica slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling of our bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of our house settling. Everything felt different now. The weight of her body next to mine, the rhythm of her breathing, even the way moonlight filtered through our curtains. Something was terribly wrong, and I was about to find out just how wrong. The truth hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday morning in March. I'd called in sick to school, something I rarely did, because I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica was hiding something massive from me. She'd left for work that morning with a kiss on my cheek and a cheerful "Have a good day, honey." But her phone had been buzzing nonstop during breakfast, and she'd ignored every call with an expression I'd never seen before. Around noon, I decided to surprise her with lunch at her office. It was something the old David would do, the David who still believed his wife loved him. I picked up sandwiches from Murphy's Deli, the place where we'd had our first date, and drove to her company's building on 5th Street. But Jessica wasn't at her desk. Her colleague Sandra looked uncomfortable when I asked where she was. Jessica took a personal day today, David. Didn't she tell you?" The confusion on Sandra's face was genuine. She clearly thought I should have known. My hands were trembling as I drove home, pieces of a horrible puzzle starting to fit together. If Jessica wasn't at work, where had she gone when she left the house that morning? And why had she lied to me? I found my answer in the most painful way possible. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Jessica's Honda Civic parked behind a silver BMW I didn't recognize. Through our living room window, I could see two silhouettes on our couch where we'd watched movies and planned our future together. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Part of me wanted to storm inside and confront them. Part of me wanted to drive away and pretend I'd never seen anything. But I'm a teacher. I believe in evidence, in facts, in truth. So I did something that would change everything. I took out my phone and started recording as I quietly entered through our back door. What I captured was Jessica in the arms of a man I'd never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, probably in his 50s. They were discussing their Colorado trip and how they'd have all the money they needed to start fresh. The man was her boss, Marcus Wellington, the regional director she'd mentioned dozens of times over dinner. And they weren't just having an affair. They were planning to steal my inheritance and disappear together. I backed out of the house as quietly as I'd entered, my phone still recording their conversation. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the device steady, but I'd captured enough to understand the full scope of their betrayal. Jessica and Marcus weren't just having an affair. They were systematically draining our joint account to fund their new life together. The spiritual retreat was genius, Jess, I heard Marcus say through my phone's speaker as I sat in my car. He actually believed you were going to some wellness center in Colorado. By the time he realizes the money's gone, we'll be in the Bahamas. Jessica's laugh, a sound I'd once found beautiful, now made my skin crawl. David's always been naive. He trusts everyone, especially me. The poor fool actually thinks I'm going through some kind of spiritual awakening. That's when something inside me snapped. Not with rage, but with a cold, calculated clarity I'd never experienced before. I'd spent my entire career teaching teenagers about historical figures who'd overcome impossible odds, who'd outsmarted their enemies through strategy rather than strength. Men like George Washington crossing the Delaware, like Frederick Douglass escaping slavery through wit and determination. If Jessica and Marcus thought they were dealing with a pushover high school teacher who'd roll over and accept betrayal, they were about to learn how wrong they were. I drove straight to First National Bank, where I'd known the manager, Tom Rodriguez, since high school. Within 30 minutes, I'd frozen our joint account and transferred what remained of my inheritance, about $195,000, into a new personal account that only I could access. Then I called my cousin Jake, who worked as a private investigator in Des Moines. "Jake, I need your help," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I think my wife is planning to steal my inheritance and disappear with her boss. I need evidence and I need it fast." "David, are you sure about this?" Jake asked. "Once we start down this road, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied, watching our house from across the street. "She wants to play games. Let's see how she handles someone who actually knows the rules." If you're rooting for David and can't wait to see how this unfolds, hit that subscribe button, because Jessica and Marcus have no idea what's coming next. Jake arrived at my house the next evening with equipment I'd only seen in movies. Tiny cameras, recording devices, and software that could track phone locations. As we sat in my kitchen, the same place where Jessica had pretended to be excited about our future together, he laid out a plan that made my history teacher's brain buzz with strategic possibilities. "First thing we need is documentation of everything," Jake explained, setting up a small camera near our living room bookshelf. "If they're planning to drain your accounts, we need proof of conspiracy to commit fraud. That conversation you recorded was a good start, but we need more. The next few days were the most nerve-wracking of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal while secretly gathering evidence against my own wife. When Jessica came home talking excitedly about her retreat preparation, I smiled and nodded, all while knowing that Jake was tracking her every move through the GPS device we'd placed on her car. The breakthrough came on Friday afternoon. Jake called me during my lunch break at school, his voice crackling with excitement. "David, you're not going to believe this. I followed Jessica to a travel agency downtown. She and this Marcus guy just booked 2 first-class tickets to Nassau for next Tuesday, the same day she told you her retreat was supposed to start. But that wasn't even the best part. While Jessica thought she was being clever, she'd made a crucial mistake. The joint account she'd been draining, it was still sending me email notifications for every transaction. Over the past week, I'd watched her withdraw another $25,000 in cash, supposedly for retreat expenses. There's something else, Jake continued. I ran a background check on Marcus Wellington. This isn't his first rodeo, David. He's been married 3 times, and each divorce involved allegations of financial misconduct. Your wife picked herself a real winner. That evening, as Jessica packed her suitcase for what she thought would be her escape to paradise, I made my own preparations. I'd contacted a divorce attorney, compiled all our evidence, and most importantly, I'd opened a new bank account where the remainder of my inheritance sat safely beyond her reach. Jessica had spent weeks planning her betrayal, but she'd overlooked one crucial detail. She was married to a man who'd spent his entire career studying how the underestimated could overcome the overconfidence. The student was about to become the teacher. The weekend before Jessica's supposed retreat was surreal. I watched my wife of 12 years pack her bags, knowing she believed she was walking away from our marriage forever with my father's hard-earned money. But instead of feeling devastated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. Saturday morning, while Jessica was at the salon getting her hair done for her spiritual journey, I met with my attorney, Margaret Chen. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in complex divorce cases, and when I showed her the evidence Jake and I had gathered, her eyes lit up. "David, this isn't just adultery," she said, spreading the photos and bank records across her desk. "This is a conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and possibly money laundering. Jessica and her boyfriend could face serious criminal charges." For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The man who'd been second-guessing every instinct, who'd been apologizing for having concerns about his wife's behavior, was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized, someone who could plan 3 moves ahead, who could smile at his wife over dinner while knowing exactly what she was planning. Sunday evening, Jessica gave what she thought was her final performance. She sat me down in our living room, the same spot where I'd caught her with Marcus, and delivered a speech about needing space to grow and how this retreat would help her find herself. "I know this is hard to understand, David," she said, taking my hands in hers. The diamond bracelet caught the lamplight, and I wondered how much of my inheritance had paid for it. "But I feel like I've lost touch with who I really am. This retreat will help me remember what's important." I looked into her eyes I'd once thought held nothing but love for me, and nodded supportively. "I want whatever makes you happy, Jess. Take all the time you need." She actually teared up at that, probably thinking about how she was deceiving such a wonderful husband. If only she knew that while she'd been planning her escape, I'd been planning something far more sophisticated. The old David would have begged her to stay, would have promised to change, would have blamed himself for her unhappiness. But the new David, he was about to teach both Jessica and Marcus a lesson about underestimating a small-town history teacher. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Iowa air that makes everything feel possible. Jessica was practically bouncing with excitement as she loaded her suitcases into her Honda, chattering about how transformative the next 2 weeks would be. She kissed me goodbye at our front door, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'll miss you, David," she said, her hand lingering on my cheek. "When I come back, I promise things will be different between us." "I'm counting on it," I replied, and I meant every word. Jessica drove away at 9:15 a.m., heading toward what she thought was the airport. What she didn't know was that Jake was following her, and that I was already 3 steps ahead of her plan. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was Jake, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "They're at the Marriott downtown, David. Checked in under Mr. and Mrs. Wellington. They think they're being so clever, spending one last night together before their big escape. At 11 a.m., I walked into the Cedar Falls Police Department with Margaret Chen, a briefcase full of evidence, and a story that made Detective Sarah Murphy's jaw drop. Bank records showing systematic theft, recordings of Jessica and Marcus discussing their fraud, proof of their fake identities for the Bahamas trip. Everything was documented with the precision of a man who'd spent his career grading papers and demanding citations for every claim. "Mr. Carter," Detective Murphy said after reviewing everything, "this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of fraud I've ever seen. We can have arrest warrants issued within the hour. But here's where I surprised everyone, including myself. I don't want them arrested today," I said calmly. "I want them arrested tomorrow morning at the airport, right before their flight to Nassau. I want them to think they've gotten away with it, right up until the moment the handcuffs click." Margaret stared at me with something like admiration. "David, that's actually brilliant. The shock will be devastating, and it'll make their crime impossible to deny." As we left the police station, I felt a strange sense of peace. For months, I'd been the victim in this story. But tomorrow morning, at Gate B7 of Cedar Rapids Airport, Jessica and Marcus would discover that the quiet history teacher had just taught them the most important lesson of their lives. Tuesday morning, March 15th, will forever be etched in my memory as the day justice served itself on a silver platter. I didn't go to the airport. I didn't need to witness their humiliation firsthand. Instead, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, waiting for the phone calls that would change everything. The first call came at 7:42 a.m. from Detective Murphy. "It's done, David. We got them both at security." Jessica broke down crying immediately, but Marcus tried to run. Airport security had to tackle him near the Starbucks. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. They found $47,000 in cash split between their carry-on bags, plus the fake passports. This is going to be an airtight case. The second call came 20 minutes later from Margaret Chen. "David, you need to hear this. Jessica's asking for a plea deal already. She wants to cooperate fully and return all the stolen money in exchange for reduced charges. She's claiming Marcus manipulated her into it." I almost laughed at that. Jessica, who'd been planning this betrayal for months, was now trying to play the victim card. It was so predictable it was almost sad. By noon, the story had spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. Small towns thrive on gossip, and the tale of the high school history teacher who'd outsmarted his cheating wife and her boss was the kind of story people would tell for years. My principal, Mrs. Anderson, called to offer her support and told me to take as much time as I needed. But the most satisfying moment came that evening. Jessica called me from jail, sobbing into the phone. "David, please, you have to help me. This is all a misunderstanding. Marcus promised me we were just borrowing the money, that we'd pay it back once his divorce was finalized." "Jessica," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I spent months watching you lie to my face, steal my father's legacy, and plan to abandon our marriage. The only misunderstanding here was yours. You thought you were smarter than me. But I love you, David. We can work this out." "No," I replied, looking around the house that was now truly mine. "We can't. Your spiritual retreat is over, Jessica. Welcome to reality." I hung up the phone and, for the first time in months, felt completely at peace. 18 months later, I'm sitting on the front porch of my house now, watching the sunset paint the Iowa sky in shades of orange and pink. It's funny how the same view can look completely different when you're seeing it through the eyes of a free man. The legal proceedings wrapped up last fall. Jessica pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and theft, receiving 3 years probation and an order to pay full restitution. Every penny she'd stolen, plus interest and legal fees. Marcus got it worse. 2 years in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. Turns out his scheme with Jessica wasn't his first rodeo, just like Jake had discovered. The FBI found evidence of similar cons he'd pulled on 2 previous girlfriends. But the real victory wasn't their punishment. It was what I built from the ashes of their betrayal. I used my father's inheritance exactly as he would have wanted. I paid off the mortgage on our house, invested in a modest portfolio that's already growing nicely, and did something I'd always dreamed of but never had the courage to pursue. I wrote a book, Lessons from the Heartland, A Teacher's Guide to Overcoming Betrayal. Became a surprise bestseller in the self-help category. Who knew that a small-town history teacher had something to say that people wanted to hear? I've been traveling to speaking engagements across the Midwest, sharing my story with people who've faced similar betrayals. There's something powerful about connecting with others who've been where I was, feeling helpless, questioning their own judgment, wondering if they'd ever trust again. Speaking of trust, I've been seeing someone. Her name is Linda, and she's a librarian from Iowa City. We met at a book signing event 3 months ago, and she has this way of laughing that makes me remember what happiness feels like. She knows my whole story, and instead of being scared off by it, she says it shows I'm a man who fights for what matters. The best part? I'm teaching again, but now I have a new lesson plan. When my students study historical figures who overcame adversity, I can speak from experience about what it means to transform from victim to victor. Every day I wake up knowing that I'm not the same man who was too trusting, too passive, too willing to accept less than I deserved. That man taught me everything I needed to know about who I never want to be again. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Jessica and Marcus actually gave me the greatest gift of my life. They showed me who I really was underneath all that blind trust and misplaced loyalty. They thought they were taking advantage of a naive small-town teacher, but instead they awakened someone who'd been sleeping for far too long. My father always used to say, "David, the measure of a man isn't whether he gets knocked down, it's whether he gets back up swinging." For months after discovering their betrayal, I thought getting back up meant simply surviving the divorce and moving on. But I was wrong. Getting back up meant becoming the kind of man who could turn their scheme against them, who could transform their cruelty into his own strength. The inheritance they tried to steal? It's grown by 30% in the past year and a half. The marriage they destroyed? It freed me to find real love with someone who sees my worth. The trust they shattered? It taught me to trust myself above all else, to listen to my instincts, and to never again accept being treated as less than I deserve. Every morning when I wake up in my mortgage-free home, every time I cash a royalty check from my book, every evening I spend with Linda talking about our future together, I'm reminded that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing that ever happened to you. Jessica is working at a call center now, trying to rebuild her life after her conviction. Marcus got out of prison 6 months ago and moved back in with his elderly mother. Their grand plan for a luxury life in the Bahamas turned into a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. Thank you for staying with David's story until the very end. It truly means the world to me that you were here for this journey from betrayal to triumph. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell if you want to see more stories of people who refuse to stay down when life knocked them flat. Should our next story focus on workplace revenge, family drama, or another tale of romantic betrayal gone wrong? Drop your suggestions in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear David's story, someone who's facing their own betrayal or feeling powerless in their situation, please share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we're stronger than we think.